Hi there. Welcome to Pesto Comics. Normally I say audio edition, but if you're listening on the podcast feed, there's actually a video that goes along with this session. And I'll be going through the slides that I'm sharing for this postmortem. Still not bad to listen via audio. I'll definitely describe what I'm referring to on each slide, but definitely helps if you have a visual to go along with it. Be sure to check it out on Substack, and I'll throw the video on YouTube as well. If you're listening to the audio version on YouTube, again, there's a video that goes along with it. All right, let's get started. This is the post-mortem for my latest campaign, Big Smoke Pulp Volume 1. This was a little different than anything I've done in the past. Every campaign I've done thus far has been for a comic of some sort, very visual medium, a lot easier to come up with advertising and all kinds of things. This time, it's a prose book. There's a lot of advantages, but the audience is pretty different from what you would find with comics. And given that the audience I've built thus far is mostly comic book readers, it was a good way to dip my toe in the water and see if going into the prose side of things would be successful. Spoilers, it went pretty well. So I'm going to get deep into the numbers. We're going to look at the funds that were raised. We're going to look at the backers, how some of the marketing played out, and then we'll just do a small Q&A at the end, going through the feeling and the vibes through this campaign. So where this postmortem comes from, it's not something that I've created myself. It's actually something that, if you are familiar with Comics Launch by Tyler James, this is something that he has put together, and I've actually just co-opted it. I've added and removed pieces to make it my own. But if you're really looking to get the most out of your Kickstarter campaigns, I always recommend checking out Comics Launch by Tyler James. It's a great program with a great community behind it. So even once you're through the courses, what really brings the value is getting to talk with other creators who are doing the same thing you're doing. Plus, you get twice monthly coaching calls with Tyler and the crew every month. So it's a great deal. I always recommend checking it out. So speaking of checking out other things, pre-launch is live as of today. I implore you, please check it out. It's on Kickstarter. This will be launching on January 8th. So if you're watching this post January 8th, it's live. And if you're watching this in February 2025 and beyond, you will be able to find this elsewhere. I guaranteed I have another campaign that's either coming up or live at that point, at which point you could probably pick up this book via a bundle. But if you are watching this when it comes out, please, I beg you, check out the pre-launch page, give it a follow. It means a lot. Every follow helps us get that launch where it needs to be on January 8th, 2025. So with that out of the way, let's get into how the campaign went for Big Smoke Pulp Volume 1. And we won't bury the lead. We'll start with the most interesting part, funding. So how did the funding go? It actually went very well in comparison to old campaigns. So well, in fact, that it's actually the best campaign I've had. Even without calculating the average per day total, it outperformed everything I had done so far. Given it's a different market than I'm used to, different audience, the comics audience, I was very impressed to see that the campaign had done so well. However, there are some caveats too that we'll talk about when we get to the next section. But for now, just very happy. It outperformed Crazy Latte Thing Called Love, which is quite a feat because that was by far my best performing campaign. The way that campaign started, the trajectory of it is still unmatched, but the end result, we reached a higher total a whole 5 days sooner than we had on Crazy Latte Thing Called Love. So very happy with how the funding has gone. And again, some caveats, we'll get into those. So here's another view of the total funding per campaign. You can see again my confidence with jumping into prose with a whole new audience was a little lower. So I lowered the goal initially, thinking that I might do half of what we had done with this campaign. And we blew by that very quickly, funding within 3 hours and then doubling that within a day. Had I kept my goal at the regular $1,000 Canadian mark, we likely would have hit that day one anyway. That said, it just continued to roll throughout. It was a pretty great campaign. We didn't have 1-0 day, a day in which no backers backed the campaign. So it was pretty steadily climbing throughout the whole experience. And right now stands as the best project I have launched thus far. And you could really see it with the average pledged per backer where the difference was made. We almost doubled what the best performing campaigns were. So both from Parts Unknown and Crazy Latte Thing Called Love were pretty close in terms of how much each backer was backing, Crazy Latte Thing Called Love had nearly twice as many backers. So it had done a lot better than From Parts Unknown. That said, Big Smoke Pulp had nearly the same amount of backers as Stay Cool and From Parts Unknown, and yet managed to hit those highs all because of the average amount pledged per backer. So it's night and day in terms of what was available. That said, a typical comic book campaign has 32 pages. I was offering over 500 pages of short stories with Big Smoke Pulp. So totally different experience in terms of the book that was provided. Isn't entirely surprising because the value for your dollar is arguably a lot higher in terms of just the amount, the quantity of content you are getting. So it's a big difference. And something interesting happened with this campaign, which was the most popular pledge levels. It's something we'll get into when we start talking about backers, but you'll notice here the most popular pledge levels weren't bundles this time around, or even just a digital fell to number two. The most popular level was the main offering, the pocketbook physical edition. So it was interesting in terms of what the audience is looking for on Kickstarter on the publishing side. You would think that comic books, collectors, all that business are really looking to hold something in their hand, and yet it's usually digital that does a lot better. In this scenario, it was the other way around. It looks like readers want something that they can carry and have on their couch and read and flip through the pages. A little different and than getting the digital. That said, I wonder if there's some thought towards a potential aftermarket. I wasn't shy about what the plan is post campaign with this in terms of we're looking to go wide and have this available on all the usual publishers. So maybe folks are waiting for it to show up on Amazon or Kobo or something like that. And that's how they'll pick it up digitally, even with all the DRM and whatever's included in that, where on Kickstarter, it's a DRM free version. And maybe folks just aren't so concerned about that. They're happy to use whatever console they're using. And then again, the Kickstarter exclusive hardcover. So there was actually a limit put on the amount of exclusive hardcovers that we made. And we hit that limit very quickly. So the fact that it still ended up on the most popular is pretty impressive given that there was a cap and it still landed on this page. On the flip side of that, the Kickstarter exclusive hardcover actually topped the highest funding pledge levels. So that was pretty interesting because even with the cap, it still managed to hit that top number. The exclusivity and the limited nature of it really drove people to go for that version, knowing that the pocketbook edition would be available both on pestocomics.com and elsewhere. So if you really wanted something that you could only get now, but you had to jump on and there's only so many spots to do so, it did pretty well. That said, there was a way to get around that, and that is how our number 3 level highest funding managed to find its place, which is the every version of Big Smoke Pulp. What that means is you get your paperback version, the digital, and the hardcover. Though we ran out of just hardcovers, we still had the ability to print more based on people who wanted both. So made a big difference. And yeah, it looks like the hardcover is really what drove this campaign. People were very interested in that, but it not just hardcover, but just physical editions in general. So just a quick breakdown of the numbers of how this was all funded. We ended up with a campaign total of $3,906 Canadian. That's well above our $500 Canadian total, thanks to 123 backers that backed the campaign. That leads to an average of $163 per day that was pledged, which again, much higher than I've seen with any of the comic book campaigns so far. And that led to a 781% total of our funding goal. Again, keeping the goal artificially low, but even if we had made it much higher, we still would have been at the 300 times if we had done double the goal, which is what I typically do, and maybe something that I'll do in the future. Having a little more faith that this would go well and hopefully do better once people get the books in their hands, see what we've put together, and maybe want a second go at it. Who knows? Maybe we'll make it even bigger than the first one. Glad to see that people really enjoyed it. 123 backers, pretty much average on what we see. And again, we'll get into the backer counts in the next section. But first, let's look at how much of the budget was actually covered this campaign. Again, being so successful, even with the lower backer count than Crazy Latte Thing Called Love, it made a huge difference. The big things about doing prose, and one of the big reasons I'm getting into it as a writer, as much as I love comic books and will always do comic books, I'm no artist. Even my art, I do try and I do some cartooning here and there, but realistically, the quality of books I want to put out, it's not something that I can do myself with at least the types of stories I have right now. Big Smoke Pulp had a huge advantage in the sense of not needing to hire out for art outside of the wonderful cover by my good buddy Roberto Villacava. Yeah, we hit 61, almost two-thirds of the budget was covered. So I'm not so in the red like I am with so many other campaigns where I'm really relying on conventions and backlist sales and things to recoup that cost of the upfront cost. So we're starting a lot ahead. And I think this has a much better opportunity to get us in the black than any campaign thus far. And let's look at exactly what the split is, and you'll have a good sense of what I'm talking about. So, in terms of what the cost was on this campaign, production was merely 20% of it. Shipping, I'll be honest, is still an estimate at this point as we're waiting on prints to arrive at my house. So I have actually overcounted in terms of how much shipping is there. And the main cost, the thing I've already paid for and I'm waiting for these prints to arrive at my door, that's 68% of the cost this time around. Usually you can invert this and the production would be two-thirds of the cost, and then printing and shipping would just fill out that last third. So the 20% of production has two factors. Number one is paying Roberto Villacava for the amazing cover that he put together. And number two is getting all the authors paid, the 40 authors that provided short stories. They all are getting paid for this work. It's an industry standard rate. Mind you, it's on the low end, if I'm being completely honest, plus the added caveat that it is in Canadian dollars with the exchange rate sinking as it has. Unfortunately, that may translate to a little bit less. That said, I did try to make them whole with author copies and things like that in exchange for their support on the Kickstarter. And it is what leads to the extra high printing costs in terms of percentage, where over two-thirds of the cost of the campaign is getting these books printed. I now understand why folks will go to Ingram Spark and those tools to do print on demand, because if you know that you're getting paid for the book before printing it, it sure makes it a lot easier to swallow. Again, on Kickstarter, not entirely an option, and there are ways to go about it, and it's something I can explore for the future. However, right now I just did it the way I would have with comics. Like everything's pre-printed and coming to the door, and I'll package them all myself and fulfill all myself. So that's what the primary cost was, and that's what led to eating up majority of the budget, and that's where we are today. So let's talk about the folks that were kind enough to help me try to recoup those costs on this budget, the backers. So the backer counts look a lot different than they do with the funding amounts. When you look at it in this light, Crazy Latte Thing Called Love has its incredible first 2 days and never looks back. It remains the most popular campaign I've had thus far. A surprising number two that actually started behind this campaign for Big Smoke Pulp was Stay Cool. Around day 5 or 6, it actually overtakes it and then never looks back. Although in the last couple of days, Big Smoke Pulp does happen to then overtake Stay Cool in the end, but it did take till those final couple of days. So we had a mid-campaign surge with Stay Cool that wasn't replicated here, but this has been a pretty steadily funded campaign with new backers coming in every day. So eventually we got there. Slow and steady wins the race. That seems to be how we got here, except slow and steady got us to second place as Crazy Latte Thing Called Love gets another surge at the end, which is totally unmatchable. Here we are. That said, very happy with how the backers did come out to support this campaign. And it is a mild improvement from the previous, which again is trending in the right direction. So if we look at the backer counts, we'll see we're in line with Stay Cool and From Parts Unknown. We're at, again, about 80 new backers. We seem to add 80 or so people every campaign. Crazy Latte Thing Called Love is the unicorn here. It added a whole bunch of new backers. And consistently, we're getting around 40 some backers that come back to support the campaign. Big thank you to all of you. There is a split in terms of where you folks have all joined. So it's not necessarily everyone who supported Unlimited Udo backed everything, although there's a handful of you. And to you, oh my goodness, I thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. But we've had folks coming and joining throughout campaign by campaign, and every single campaign has brought a backer to this campaign of some sort. So it's nice to see that even though this is not a comics campaign, it's not the typical project, we still had folks that gave it a look and we're happy to support. As always, very happy with that result and very happy to have anyone who is watching or listening that has supported the campaign. I really do appreciate it. It does mean a ton. So we were talking about the split in how digital and physical backers came about, and you'll see that Now that we're not looking at comics, there's a total flip in terms of physical versus digital. This was overwhelmingly a physical copy campaign, which also lent itself to the costs being so much higher in terms of printing, as almost everybody was grabbing a printed version of this book. That said, Crazy Latte Thing Called Love also had a similar experience. I think in that case, it was more about, again, the very high backer count, but also we had a lot of variants and all kinds of different things available, much more of an event type of launch. Where this one actually was a little more subtle in terms of marketing, and we'll get to that part later. What was interesting was just how the physical backers truly came out in force this time. I do believe part of that was we sold out of those hardcovers that were made available on the page. So that automatically added 40 physical copies, surpassing what we did in digital in general. And as I spoke before, there may be a different culture in terms of digital campaigns, right? Where comic readers, if you read digital and if you read physical, you're more of a collector. Here, there's a little more of a funnel in terms of where people read their digital books, and maybe having a DRM free copy doesn't mean as much as it would to a comic book backer. But that's something I'd love to dig into and really get a better sense of in the future. I'm very interested to see how that plays out with future books. And again, another breakdown of what the digital versus physical looks like. So we're looking at just over 70% of backers having been physical backers. And you can see previous campaigns here. We never cross 44% physical. So this was totally out of left field in terms of how the comics are backed relative to prose books. So yeah, it's something to keep in mind. Maybe worth checking that is, again, print on demand for comics is not as reliable or even available here in Canada, where for books, there seems to be a little more of a system in place to do that. So maybe that's something to look into to help reduce costs on my end and maybe get these books in the black where I need them to be to continue doing them. Now, in terms of where people are coming from, we have backers from all over the world. You'll see two very similar flags there. One is the Netherlands, one is Luxembourg. But yeah, so we have folks from Europe, which is always great. The top three, always consistent in terms of one, the order, and two, their appearance. The US always is the majority of my backers. And again, thank you to all the Americans listening and watching. Yeah, you guys are the reason that this does well at all. So I really do appreciate it. Canadians, of course, being Canadian myself means a lot. It's not all friends and family, which is wonderful. It's a lot of just the Canadians that I made friends with in person and I've seen around. And I really do appreciate all those who did back and a lot of folks that I haven't met in person. I do appreciate it. So yeah, Canadian folks representing and probably being about the right ratio relative to our population and all that. And then 9 backers from the UK. Again, I always have backers from the UK, and this number stays relatively consistent. And it's also a lot of returning backers within that number. So I really do appreciate you guys doing so. I do not know that I have sent a package to Mexico yet. Surprisingly, I've done to Luxembourg, but I haven't done to Mexico. So that is actually a new country that I'll be shipping to this time. Germany and the Netherlands, I have sent to before, but always great to see these books making it outside of the local area and seeing that Kickstarter kind of reaches a worldwide audience. And it means a ton that folks that aren't just from Toronto are finding the campaign and thinking enough to check it out and support. I really do appreciate it. Of these backers, what kind of backers are they in terms of how much they support Kickstarter? We have a profile, and you'll see that 2/3 of these backers are power backers. That means backers that are on Kickstarter constantly looking for campaigns. They're called super backers. I'm one myself with over 900 plus campaigns backed. So you'll see that they drive this, right? It's the ecosystem of Kickstarter that makes Kickstarter successful. There are some core backers, again, folks that are a little more choosy, and I do appreciate that's a nice chunk. But we also have from passive to first time to casual, building up that last third of backers, which is very impressive. I think a lot of first time backers, it means a lot. It means that they didn't even have a Kickstarter profile until they saw this campaign. So it really does mean a ton that they thought that Big Smoke Pulp was the book that they wanted to back first before they back anything else on the platform. So I really do appreciate it. And the same with the casual and passive folks. The fact that they are maybe a little more judicious with what they choose to back and chose this, it means a ton. Not to discount the super backers and the core backers. Again, without you guys, none of this happens because You guys are the ones keeping the Kickstarter ecosystem alive, something that I'm very much a part of. So I really do appreciate it. How do these folks actually back the campaign when they find it on Kickstarter? More than half are doing it on the desktop. So I've done a couple of presentations now about crowdfunding on Kickstarter and how you have to build your story page with mobile in mind. And I still think that's valid. As you can see, the other half of people who back, it's nearly a 50-50 split, is doing it on mobile. So you really have to keep in mind about how you build your campaign page and make sure that it reads well on a phone, because half of the folks that are going to back your campaign are going to check it out on their phone. So it does mean a lot that you think of them when you're building your campaigns, which I've always done, and it seems to be working well. That said, it looks like the website for Kickstarter is really the best way to do everything. It's just they've put much more thought into their website. So even myself, when I'm backing campaigns, I rarely do it on the phone. I'm contributing to this desktop group, and understandably. But again, regardless of how you go about it, always appreciate you backing. So how do I find these backers? Marketing. So the thing with marketing and the thing with how Kickstarter works is just because somebody visits your page doesn't mean they're going to pledge right then. And that's okay. It does give you an opportunity to save your campaign. So you can see here, again, crazy latte thing called love being an outlier. I am pretty consistent how many followers I can bring in. Big Smoke Pulp was actually a shorter pre-launch window and a shorter campaign. So the fact that it's staying pretty tight with everything else, I still think it's very impressive, because Big Smoke Pulp probably had a month less pre-launch time than From Parts Unknown did, or any other campaign for that matter. So the fact that this was able to stay relatively consistent in terms of the follower count, I'm very happy with that. And I wasn't pushing it so much on the socials. It was more or less a quiet launch. Again, because my audience being mostly comic books people, I don't want to inundate them with this book that isn't for them so much. So I brought it up in the newsletter frequently, and I would occasionally bring it up online, but I wasn't doing that full court press that I've done with the comics. And I still managed to get a handful of followers there. And the converted rate is pretty consistent as well. So I'm very happy with how that all played out. The other thing I tried something new with was the Kickstarter video. So I always do a video of some form or fashion. What I had done there is I just did a straight trailer. I put together a sizzle reel that's 30 seconds to a minute long. And that seems to get a lot more completed views than anything else. For Crazy Latte Thing Called Love, I did a little bit of a hybrid. I started with that trailer, and then I followed it up with a long explainer, say what's available on the campaign and why we're doing it and all that business. And you can see the drop off in completed views. A lot of people checked it out. They probably watched that trailer and then saw my mug as I started rambling on and gave up. And that's fair. I'm okay with that. So I mentioned at that campaign that I wouldn't be doing that again. So what I did this time actually was I just took a chunk of the newsletter from launch day. I always record it as a podcast. Now I took a chunk of that and I made it a video and I slapped it on the campaign page. And all that said, it did pretty well. That launch day newsletter that I do is usually a bit of an explainer of what's available and bundles that are available and some of the background of how we got to this story or how we got to this project. So it fit really well as a video. That said, it wasn't even a talking head. It was just captions on a black background, like I typically do with my blog posts that I do on socials. So visually speaking, it wasn't terribly captivating. So I can understand why half of the folks that watched dropped off before the end. Maybe on the next campaign, I'll go back to that kind of hybrid approach. Maybe not as long as I did with Crazy Latte Thing Called Love. It was a very long video in the end, but I could always add an explainer at the end. Or as I was originally considering and didn't follow through with, maybe do an explainer in the body of the Kickstarter page and have the sizzle reel as the main video. Who knows? We'll see, but there's a lot of experimentation there. This one, I think, given the lower effort I had put in, it performed relatively well. So I'm not upset about it. So where did backers come from in terms of Kickstarter referrals? All over the place. So the Kickstarter analytics are obviously pretty detailed because they can tell you exactly where someone clicked that led to someone backing. And really it breaks down into 3 categories. There's people who get an email of some sort. So it's either a new project from a creator you've backed. So that's a lot of returning backers, in this case, 12 of them. There's people who are following via pre-launch. That's why pre-launch is so important. And you can see they're the number one in terms of amount pledged, even though the creator you've backed before added one more backer, the amount pledged is double for the people that were following on pre-launch. So that was a big deal. And then discovery. So folks just scrolling around the Kickstarter page and then liked the teaser image, liked the campaign page, and decided to back with no real sense of what it was before they got there. So that always means a lot. And there's versions of that too. There's people doing it in the app on the recommended pages or in the search. But that's a breakdown of how people find the page. So if there's anything to take from this, it's number one, email is still king. Getting to your potential backers and letting them know that a campaign is live and the work that Kickstarter does for you in that is huge. That's where you're going to get majority of your backers. But number two is what I always say about being very high up in the algorithm and really showing that you're doing well as a campaign and you're very popular makes a big difference because of where you show up in discovery. You want people to find your campaign online, and how they're going to do that is getting high in discovery. You get high in discovery by pleasing the algorithm and having a great launch day. So it looks like in this case, where we funded within 3 hours, doubled it within the day, I think that really helped in terms of people finding the campaign on the landing page or via discovery or whatever. So it makes a big difference to do well when you start. Yeah, it means everything. But what if they're not looking on the Kickstarter page right away? There are other ways to get your backers. Unfortunately, Kickstarter doesn't always know where they're coming from. And if you don't provide a specific link, it has no way to parse those people. So 15% of the backers on the campaign, I have no idea where they came from. It was direct traffic. They found a link somewhere. I usually provide a tracking code with all the links that I post. So I know that these folks may have got it from other people sharing it, or who knows. I'm not sure how they found it. However, I'm happy to have them. So that's 28 backers that came from somewhere that wasn't within the Kickstarter ecosystem. They were from outside. And then there's a quick little breakdown. So Substack does pretty well in terms of always bugging people. What this doesn't count is people who are at the pre-launch page. So if they were following, because I constantly bring it up at the beginning of every Substack, hey, this is the next project, and they followed there, it wouldn't show up here. If they clicked the link on Substack on launch day or after and backed it that day, then it would show up here as a Substack back. And then you can see here, I broke it out in terms of other platforms. I have Facebook twice. Please ignore that. So that's 3 for Facebook and then 1 for Instagram and 1 for X. So socials doing okay, not great. Again, most of these platforms, Instagram, Facebook, even X or Twitter right now, are pay to play. It's the only way you're getting out to all your followers. And it's not something I did this time out. So the results show it. I wasn't eager to shell out for advertising for this very short campaign. And that may have led to the lower numbers from socials this time out. One tool I always do shell out for because I find it is much more useful. And again, emails are king. BackerKit. So a lot of the backers that came from BackerKit, it's about 8% of the total funded. That's 3% more than it was from Parts Unknown. So it's a pretty good improvement in terms of how many people saw that email from BackerKit and decided to back, even with the open rate and the click rate being a lot lower than it was in the past. I sent half as many emails this time out, but the pledge rate remained the same. So maybe had I sent out more emails, I could have done a lot better. I think I'll do this again for Naked Kaiju Woman. I'll be a little more adamant about the emails. Again, with a longer runway, this won't launch for over a month. I'll be able to send an email or two extra where I wasn't able to with Big Smoke Pulp. And again, it's all kind of a testing ground as I want to ramp up in terms of how many campaigns are launching and how quickly. So I'd really like to see how much I can expedite and condense this whole BackerKit launch exercise as well. And that's it for the review of data. So what I want to do now, reflect on the campaign. So there's a bit of a Q&A. Again, I mentioned Comics Launch has put these together with Tyler James. And it's just a few questions thinking about how this campaign went and how we can improve and what went well, what didn't go well. And yeah, so let's get into it. How do you feel now that the campaign is over? It did pretty well. It did better than I had hoped. That said, I was so close to getting everything covered, getting all the costs covered. And then we had some political turmoil and printing costs got a little more expensive, which is concerning. And the printing costs started to eat up anything that would get us close to the black. And now we're at about 2/3 of the budget covered. So I was really hoping that this would be the one that would hit the black. So I'm in the middle. I'm happy the campaign did well. I'm upset that the external factors made it feel like it did less well. But nonetheless, I'm still pretty happy with it. In that regard, let's talk about what the high point of the campaign was. So for this, it was the launch and how successful it was right off the bat. Again, it kept the goal very low. I was expecting it not to do so well. I was expecting it to maybe do a little bit over the goal. I had no faith in my capability to reach out to a new audience. I know that the authors involved are all wonderful folks and they all have their own audiences. And I should have factored that in, that maybe they're driving people to the campaign or what have you. But I still couldn't get over that self doubt that this is something new. So you got to take it easy. You got to keep your expectations low. So the fact that it just performed a notch better than the previous campaign, it's back on the trail in terms of backers and that it's doing a little bit better, but also just the fact that the higher ticket value of items led to it being the number one campaign I've run thus far. It just means the world. Like it's wonderful to see it all come together as it has. I'm very happy with how it all played out. And yeah, so day one was the high point and it continued from there, but day one was a big relief for me for sure. The worst part of the campaign was more so just dealing with the back end of things, not realizing how printing was going to backfire. It's something I was really familiar with doing comics, and I knew that books are a little different. I didn't realize how much more it would fluctuate in terms of costs. If I had locked it down sooner, maybe I would have done better. I didn't do so because I was still working on formatting while the campaign was going. Even though all the writing was done and everything was more or less ready to go, the actual book wasn't assembled quite yet. So that's what led to this low point. I wasn't ready. I was fortunate enough to find a sale on my usual printer. There was a Black Friday sale, so that helped mitigate that increase in cost. But again, what I estimated and then what it ended up being was a pretty low point. Even with the discount, it didn't get me to what I had initially estimated it was going to cost. So the sudden increase in cost made it from a successful campaign to over budget campaign. That was the low point. That said, still very happy with how it went. And yeah, we'll do it again. I'll just come at it a little smarter the next time. So one thing I did feel was different this campaign that changed me in the sense of how I'll approach things going forward is I know I can live in both worlds. I always thought I could. I've written a lot of short stories. I've always gone to writing conferences and all kinds of things, but I was always the comics guy, right? I always felt like I was an outsider in that world. Although all I did was add some stories to this anthology, it's not necessarily me myself that's bringing the audience to this. I still feel like I have a place in that world, and it gives me some hope for projects that I have coming in the new year. This was all kind of a testing ground for some cool things that I have planned, and I really wanted to make sure that if I go there to this other side of Kickstarter that I'm unfamiliar with, am I going to flop entirely or can I make it work? And the fact that it did better than anything I've done thus far has me rethinking a lot of things. I'm not going to leave comics anytime soon, but now I can follow up and do some prose stuff and it might do pretty well. I'm looking forward to really diving into that in the near future. And if you're interested in that and you're following this as it comes out, I'll be doing that on the first post of 2025. We'll talk about all the things that I'm planning for that year that I know of so far. So that'll be a lot of fun. So what surprised me the most about this campaign, it was just the high ticket value, like the Kickstarter exclusive hardcover. I thought I was doing as a niche thing. I thought most people were going to back the pocketbook paperback. It's affordable. It's what you would expect to see on shelves in terms of a pulp book. I thought that comic books would be where all the collectors are at and people who want things for their shelves or for their boxes or for whatever. They want the variant covers. They want the special thing. I didn't think that was going to be true on the publishing side, and I was completely wrong. In fact, I should have planned to print even more hardcovers, given that they sold out so quickly. Again, had I budgeted a little better, maybe I could have made sure that was readily available for everybody. And maybe it's something to consider for the next time I do this, that I'll restrict the hardcovers less and make those more available because they seem to be very popular. My biggest concern now that this campaign is over is repeating the success. It's what I said with Crazy Latte Thing Called Love. With that Post-Mortem, I mentioned I hit such a high point. How am I going to maintain this? And the truth of it is I came back to earth, and it looks like now I'm slowly climbing the mountain again. That was a huge anomaly in terms of how well that campaign did. So I don't know if that's the case here. I'm hoping that this is the start of the publishing arm of what I'm doing, and it accelerates from here. It keeps growing. I really don't want to regress from this level again. I just barely got to the point where it was covering itself until the print costs overtook everything. And I'm hoping that with the next couple publishing campaigns, those cover themselves almost entirely, if not become profitable. That's the goal. And that's what my concern is. This a high point, or is this the foundation? I'm really hoping it's the foundation and we build from here, but who knows? So always I got that concern in the back of my head, because as more and more campaigns come out and fewer of them are successful in terms of covering their costs, this becomes a lot harder to do. We're hitting that point near the end of the year where looking back for tax purposes and all that and seeing where all the money went, I've really got that on the top of my mind. So I'm hoping that 2025 things pick up and go in the right direction. And this is the base of where it lands. What worked really well, again, the Kickstarter hardcover, this theme is that I did not expect it to do so well. And it really took off. It was really impressive. The other thing was stretch goals. Every time I put in a stretch goal, like by the morning, it was eaten up. So I think doing stretch goals by improving the book in some form or fashion really makes a difference. I think that's what I might do going forward. I've always been big about doing something. I mentioned even in my previous campaign that I don't want to do so many of the tchotchkes and things like magnets and bookmarks and all that. I still did a bookmark for this one, and people seemed happy about still getting something physical. So it doesn't mean I'll stop doing that. But I think at least for the early stretch goals, the idea will be improving the main product in some form or fashion, adding pages, adding something. And then as we hit more, it'll be more about those extra little bits and bobs. I'm slowly collecting a box full of all kinds of bits and bobs to give out. I made it a campaign level, the grab bag. And there's always a couple backers who just want the stuff and not so much the book. So I have all that stuff for them. So I'm always happy to share that. But the less of that I'm collecting, I think the better for everyone. So yeah, I think stretch goals, but stretch goals that improve the main products. Can I do it again? I sure hope so. If we're speaking specifically about Big Smoke Pulp, originally it was just Big Smoke Pulp. And then right by launch, they had decided, you know what? We're going to call it Volume 1. So the plans are to have a Volume 2. I'm going to aim for the same time next year. This gives me lots of time to do a call for entries and read all the stuff that's out there. I know a lot of the authors that were involved in this one would be thrilled to be in the second version, and I'm happy to have their stories and see where they fit. And yeah, I don't think there's even a limitation on the size of the book. I really did try to keep this under 500 pages. It went over in the end, at least from the pocketbook size. The hardcover is actually closer to 400, so it's a bit of a misnomer. But the main book is over 550 pages at this point. So it did really well. I think it's at 560 is what I sent to the printer. So it overshot even then, but I'm okay with having a nice thick book on the shelf and providing that to folks. So I think you definitely will do it again. Really looking forward to getting there. So yes, absolutely. Can do it again. We'll do it again. How might I do it better next time? So number one, I think, is not limiting those Kickstarter exclusive hardcovers, at least not as strictly as I did this time around. Maybe I prepare to have even more out there. But the second thing is leaving more time for marketing, getting that pre-launch up a lot sooner. Again, I was limited by the fact that my fourth campaign hadn't been fulfilled. I was able to twist the arm of the Kickstarter trust and safety team to let me do a pre-launch a little earlier than I technically should have. That said, it still wasn't as early as I wanted. Now that I'm a creator in good standing and I've done my now sixth campaign is launched, I should be able to get those pre-launch pages up well early. And that's my plan, is that I'll have a lot more time to say, hey, this book is coming out in 2 months, and start collecting those followers early on, and then have that really big launch and maybe get the back accounts way up so that these things become profitable in the near future. We'll see where we are in a year. By then, I should have a number of campaigns out by the time Big Smoke Pulp Volume 2 comes out, and hopefully the backer count continues to grow. You saw when we were reviewing that. Every campaign, I'm collecting a whole bunch of new backers, and hopefully that returning backer count grows with each campaign and then like snowballs on itself. So marketing is the thing I will do even better next time. What completely bombed this time was the combination of comics and books. Again, knowing that they were different markets, I didn't expect this to do terribly well. Normally, I sell two or three of the full Pesto package, or it's every comic I have plus the new one, or I'll sell multiples of books, the entry pack where you get all the issue ones of my books. That didn't do so well this time. That said, we still sold some comics along with the books, which was wonderful to see people still want to pick up a little bit of each. But so I'm not entirely surprised that these things didn't go together. So I'm not entirely upset with how that played out. However, yeah, it didn't go as well as I'd hoped. The other thing I offered was to write a story for someone. If there's anybody who wanted a story included in the book, I made a tier that I would write the story that you pitched to me and include it in the book and give you the story by credit. That was one of those high tier items that their cost is way out there. And yeah, no backers there, but again, not surprised. You always throw those out because you never know. But yeah, no bites this time, and I'm not entirely upset about that anyway. Lessons learned. So really, the biggest lesson of this is that you guys are wonderful. The backers of this campaign, the authors were wonderful. They helped push the campaign on all their socials. I was very pleased with that. We have a nice little Discord. A big thanks to Joel and folks for keeping that running. And yeah, I think it's a nice community. Again, I've always been very boastful about how wonderful the comics community is. And one thing I've learned very quickly, I mentioned I was going to conferences and all that business with a bunch of indie authors, and most of the ones I've run into have been wonderful. So coming from film school when I was much younger and meeting those folks and seeing how cutthroat it is, or even where I am now in the corporate world on my day job and seeing just how transactional everything is. It's always wonderful to be in a community like the indie author community or the indie comic community and just seeing how everybody's in it to help one another out, right? It's the rising tide lifts all boats. I think that's a very accurate view of the whole group. And I think that, yeah, it really shows in the support that you get. Even as a relatively unknown author, in this case, my first anthology I've put together and still got a lot of support. I'm very happy with how it all turned out. I didn't learn anything new, but I guess I learned that there's another community that kind of backs up what they say in that sense. And we're happy to support another indie author. So very happy with how it all turned out. And with that, I thank you very much for checking out the Post-Mortem for Big Smoke Pulp. Like I said, I'll do this again for next year in terms of Big Smoke Pulp Volume 2, but I'll be doing many more Post-Mortems. There's a lot of projects that I have planned between now and then, both on the comics side and the prose side. If you are interested in what's coming, again, I implore you to check out that post in the new year. But in terms of what's coming up next on the Substack, on December 25th, a year in review, a Merry Christmas, and a look back at the year that was. And then on January 1st, we have a preview of the year ahead, a Happy New Year, and a look forward to what's coming. And then on January 8th, the launch date of Naked Kaiju Woman, we have Let's Get Naked Kaiju Woman, a series with nothing to hide. And we'll go through kind of everything that's available and what inspired that book. Again, it's not what you might expect given the title, and I'll be happy to share that with you. If you haven't followed the campaign, I implore you, please do. It does mean a lot for how well everything will do on launch day. In terms of upcoming appearances, I've got nothing planned for 2024. There's just a couple weeks left anyway. And 2025, I'm waiting for the replies for both Toronto Comic Con and Fan Expo Canada. We are waiting to see if we are getting a table. I say we because it's me and my podcasting buddy, Roberto Villacava. We're trying to split a table. I'll let you know if I end up at either of those cons next year. For the Pesto Comics release calendar, January 8th, 2024, Naked Kaiju Woman. Big deal. Look for that one. From Parts Unknown number 2 on February 26th. Number 3 on April 9th. And number 4 on May 28th. A lot to look forward to. And on the Instant Ink Comic Book Podcast, we have the last bit with Steve from Comics Asylum. Plus, full disclosure, we are recording this early. We are either going to be taking a bit of a break over the Christmas holiday, or we'll have something special. We'll see how that all plays out. It depends on how everything goes through the holidays. But yeah, this is being pre-recorded in early December, so we'll see if we have something ready for that period. And with that, we're not going to do our super secret epilogue that we always do because we're doing the video. But I just want to say thank you very much. As always, I was very happy with how this campaign went. A little bit concerned, always had a bit of stress in terms of getting it together, but I think it came together very well. I'm excited to be through it and past it. And now I know that the projects that I have planned for next year should do relatively well with your help, with your backing, and your support. As always, I really appreciate you. I'll see you next week for a review of how 2024 went, not just this campaign, but everything, how everything went. So yeah, share that. And then in the new year, we'll talk about all the cool stuff that I have coming out. I just can't wait to share with you. It's a lot. It's a lot of fun. Yeah, please check it out if you can. And until then, have a good one. Thanks for joining me. See you next week.